Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Douillard, and today I want to talk about how our brain can work at the speed of light. And a new study that came out from the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that the brain is actually not so linear. You know, we always used to think that the brain was like nerves and neuronal connections, and everything traveled through these train tracks of linear pathways to make our thoughts happen. And they go very fast. But now they're realizing that it's impossible for it to be 100% linear. It has to be quantum. And the reality is we have a quantum brain, one that travels at the speed of light, versus a linear brain that travels as fast as our nerves can take us. They used to theorize that the reason our brain became 6 times bigger, which was called the encephalization quotient, was the reason why we needed a bigger brain to process more information in a linear train track kind of a way. Well, it turns out that that whole theory of bigger brain, smarter people, the bigger the brain, the smarter you are, doesn't actually add up. It's basically been inconclusive as the reason why we're smarter. And now we're looking at that there's other reasons why we actually are smarter, and it's actually linked to something called biophotons, ultra-weak photon emissions that come out of our DNA. Every cell, every DNA is producing these emissions, these photons of light. And photons are really interesting because they are both waveforms and particles. So they can be either sort of a wave where you can't see them, like a visual light spectrum, or a particle where you actually can isolate them as an individual particle. And we'll talk about why that's important in just a second. But from the perspective of biophotons, biophotons are these emissions that come out of our DNA that the body uses to de-stress or communicate and process information from one part of our body to another. In fact, when they actually look at these biophotons, these emissions that come about 12 per second per cell per DNA, which is a whopping number of emissions that are constantly happening, they can either be coherent or they can be incoherent. So if you're super stressed out, eating a lot of bad junk food, you're going to produce a lot of incoherent biophotons or ultra-weak photon emissions, which can be damaging to the body. But when you meditate, do yoga, breathe, get massages, do things that are positive for the body, we actually create something called coherent biophoton emissions, which actually carry information from one part of the body to another. In fact, when they actually studied the emissions and the patterns and the syntax of the biophotons, they found that the syntax of the release of the biophotons actually mimic all of the world's languages, suggesting that we know that the biophotons are information-carrying particles, or waves, traveling at the speed of light, but they mimic the world's language, so they clearly are some way that the body communicates with itself in a kind of very subtle, invisible fashion, which is really, really important. And they're really important because in one study, for example, the biophoton emissions, this was a Cornell study, from plants, the positive biophotons from one plant increased the rate of growth of another plant by 30%. So they have this incredible power to support, us outside of our body as well as inside of our body. There was another study where they took monkeys. One monkey was radiated with some radiation, and they put a healthy monkey into this little chamber with the other unhealthy monkey. And within 48 hours, the biophotons were the mechanism for the damage of the healthy person. So the biophotons emitted from the damaged, radiated person was actually causing radiation damage in the healthy person. So they can be good or bad. And that's why in Ayurvedic medicine, we always talk about being sattvic. Sattvic means loving, giving, kinding from an emotional perspective. Eating sattvic foods, meaning whole foods, foods that are not processed or refined or sprayed or chemical additives, that they're actually what nature provided. Because when you eat them, what nature provided, there's a synergy between the microbes and the food and the plant, and that's the sattvic relationship that really we need from the biochemistry of the plant, but also the the microbiology of the plant, because those bugs inoculate our gut bugs, and they support, pretty much everything, right? That what we think, what we say, what we crave, all comes from our microbiome, as we now know, which is sort of really, really interesting. What's also really interesting is that these biophotons travel at the speed of light at great distances. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, or it's called entanglement, where these biophotons are affected by intention at great distances at the speed of light, suggesting that if you meet someone, for example, for the first time, because your intention was to meet that person, your biophoton emissions were already interacting with that person at the speed of light before you even met them, which means you may have thousands of conversations at a subtle biophoton level before you even actually met them, which might help us understand why we sometimes instantly like them or instantly aren't really sure about them. And that's because we've been already having a level of communication at the speed of light with these subtle ultra-weak biophoton emissions, which are kind of really amazing and really interesting. And the thing that I love about them the most is that in Ayurvedic medicine, the cause of disease is called pragya prad, which means the mistake of the intellect, where our brain, our mind, our being started to think of ourselves as separate from the underlying field of intelligence from which we come. Ayurveda calls that field consciousness. Quantum physics calls it zero-point fields, unified field theories, but they're fields that support the production of matter, particulate matter. And biophotons are both field waveforms and particles. So they're both unmanifest and manifest at the same time, if you will. So in Ayurvedic medicine, pragya prad is when the mind starts thinking of itself as separate from the field of consciousness from which we come, and to restore the memory of that pure consciousness in every single cell of the body is the cure for disease or imbalance or degeneration. And how do you do that? How do you put yourself in the middle between the field and the physiology, the junction between consciousness and matter? Well, if you're going to put your attention there, sort of like a lamp at the door, you're going to shine awareness into the field as well as into the physiology, and that awareness of both allows us to restore the memory. Oh yeah, I'm actually not this rogue cell acting independently of the whole. I'm actually part of the whole, and of course, we are stronger together than we are apart, right? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. We really do have the ability to function from the field, and the mechanism for that is actually biophotons, which is what Einstein predicted, talked about, Max Planck talked about it, the father of quantum physics, and now tons of modern science being supporting this very, very, very Vedic concept. So the biophotons function at both the level of the field and the physiology, because they are both particle and waveforms at the same time. And they have studies have now shown that they are affected by your intention. Studies have shown that actually putting your attention in certain ways have actually altered the outcome of these random event generators, the ones that they use for lotteries and things like that. And if you meditate or focus on these random event generators, they can specifically and regularly and reproducibly be altered by the intention through the mechanism of biophotons. I know this sounds crazy, right? But it's actually very real. And there's studies. You go to my website at LifeSpa.com, type in biophotons, read all my articles about this. It's sort of mind-boggling. But the point is that Ayurvedic medicine said that the cause of disease was where consciousness meets matter, and matter forgets that it's part of that field. And the restore of the memory of that is the cure for disease. And that happens at this level of biophotons, which are now, we know, affected by our intention. I wrote articles how this could be the mechanism for prayer, for distance healing. And because when you have an intention that's coherent from meditation and yoga and breathing and prayer, deep prayer, where you're coherent, that coherent release of biophotons is affected by intention at great distance at the speed of light. That's called entanglement. And so therefore it can affect change at great distances instantaneously, which just becomes mind-boggling that we're really quantum beings. And the research from the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences just came out talking about how, yes, our brain is not linear, it's quantum. And the mechanism for that quantum thinking is, in fact, the release of these ultra-weak biophoton emissions, which are so crazy and powerful, and they match up exactly with the Ayurvedic understanding that we need to continue to dip the cloth into the dye of our own consciousness and become more saturated in the source of who we truly are. And that happens by putting our attention at this very subtle level, because biophotons function at both levels, the field and the physiology. And when you're there at the junction, you can infuse awareness into the physiology and the field at the same time. That's the magic of biophotons. Super crazy. I'm writing a lot more about them. As the research comes in, I'll write about it, because it helps us understand just how quantum, how unlimited in potential us humans really are. All right, check out that article at LifeSpa.com. Just type in biophotons in my search bar on the website, and you'll get all this really cool information. And talk to you all next week. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. John Douillard.